Hello, ladies and gentlemen, MarauderEX and Axis here to give you a top 10 video. I'm doing top 10 swords in gaming, as Axis is trying to bite me because he is fierce like sword. I don't, he's angry about being picked up. He does not want to be social. Dude, no, you don't want to show the internet how awesome you are. He's a butt. Anyway, top 10 swords in gaming. So, this is one that was really entertaining for me because, how often do you really think about swords in gaming? You think about, like, stats, maybe aesthetics, sometimes the combination of the two. So, we're going to jump into this working from 10 to 1 as per normal. These are actually ranked in order in which I would rather have this awesome weapon. So, starting off with number 10, the Keyblade from Kingdom Hearts. Now this one's number 10 because I do love Kingdom Hearts. I love the game franchise. It's a fantastic thing. It has a great deal of sentimental value for me. The problem is the Keyblade is not a sword. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about this one because a couple of the Keyblades do have what look like sword components, but it has no blade. If you look at any of the 3D models for like 90% of the Keyblades, they don't have an actual defined sharp edge. You're beating people with a giant key. It is a blunt instrument, and therefore I have a really hard time categorizing that as a sword, let alone a key blade. I get a lot of the symbology that they want to put into it. The symbology is not a word, is it? I don't know. Anyway, I get it, I really do, but it needs a sharp edge. And like the Ultimate Keyblade from Kingdom Hearts 1 does kind of have that. Like you can see like what looks like a katana buried underneath all of that fanciness. But yeah, Keyblade, number 10. Number 9. ZSaber, Mega Man X, or Mega Man Zero. Really any Mega Man past the original series game, because Zero tends to be a regular series staple. He has basically an energy sword. They can't call it a lightsaber because legality reasons, but it's an energy sword that can cut through all sorts of things. His tends to function a little differently depending on what game you're playing. It either, is a curved katana-like sword, or it's just a straight sword. It's never really all that consistent, and it really depends on what series you're looking at. But, high-tech, futuristic sword that, is made out of energy that cuts through robots like a hot knife through butter. What's not to like about that? I'm kind of a fan, really. So, number 8. Soulcalibur, and this is from the original Soulcalibur. This is not what Soulcalibur became, because that is a video that I could do in depth about how the Soulcalibur series kind of went off the rails and everything starts getting weird. But originally Soul Edge was 2 swords because it was wielded by Cervantes, and then one of them broke and became a broadsword, like a great sword rather, and then its counter was found, and it was a one-handed Tai Chi style sword, but it was very ornate, very pretty, and then somehow it becomes a sword made out of crystals and rocks that are suspended around each other, and it's a lot of themes of redemption. But the original Soulcalibur is one that I find to be an amazingly designed sword. It had an interesting story component. It came from a character you really didn't expect throughout the series, and it was kind of a surprise. And looking at it, like, what the sword looks like, who it's, but like, where does it come from? Where did it just kind of appeared, and now it's designed to stop the evil that is Soul Edge. Interesting good versus evil type scenario, but the original one for me is probably the coolest looking one because it actually is fairly realistic, because it's not floating components. Now that I don't like the floating components, that's very neat for a magic type sword, which I guess this is, but I don't know, it got a little too ridiculous with the non-connected floating materials. So, number 7, the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda. Now, this isn't even the best sword in the Zelda series. Much like the Keyblade was not the best Keyblade in Kingdom Hearts. But the Master Sword, it's often seen as it's the blade of evil's bane. However, in most games, it's either upgradable. In Link to the Past, you could get the Master Sword. It's like, great, I have the Master Sword. And then it can be tempered and forged and enhanced in numerous ways. Meaning, it's not the ultimate sword, it's the ultimate baseline for a sword, because it has all of these potential upgrades that make it even better. It's already got some really badass capabilities in terms of, defeating evil, but hey, we can improve upon that. I really do like the design to it. It's an interestingly designed crossguard handle, and I love how ornate it's always kind of grown into. It started off very simplistic because of the art style at the time, but they've taken the same sword and they've just kind of made it more and more realistic, but keeping a lot of the fantasy theme to it. I'm a fan of that. I kind of am. They stick to the roots with that one. Number 6, the ZSaber from Grandia 2. Now, this is kind of a cop-out because ZSaber could mean one of two things, and I'm going with the sword because the sword is actually kind of badass. But in the game, you hear the ZSaber and you think, oh, the sword of the gods, which there is the sword, but then there's also the giant ship-like weapon that looks really neat and not at all what you would expect in this world setup. But Ryudo's sword is what I'm actually going for, because that sword by itself has some great stats. It has a great aesthetic, and it's one of the few times that the weapon model actually changes between a couple of, there's a couple of view model versions of Ryudo's sword, but that's the most unique. And at the time, that was mind-blowing. It's you equip the weapon and it changes the appearance of the weapon. And then you look at it, it's like, that's such a badass looking sword. I want that. The ZSaber in itself is really impressive looking. It's actually a sword that I kind of wish I had a replica of, because that's kind of badass. I'm not gonna lie. Number 5, the Force Sword from Shining Force 2. Now, this is another sword that kind of changes over time, because the original design of the Shining series was not actually to be directly linked. There were links, but I can almost guarantee that it was never designed to say, we're going to link Shining in the Darkness to Shining Force 2, Shining Wisdom. We're not going to do that. It's just, we're going to take some things and kind of... As the series progressed, it became more of a centralized world with all of these things connecting together. But the early games were just... We're going to do this. It wasn't until some of the Game Gear games came out that they started linking the games together, specifically Shining Force 1 and Shining Force 2. Shining Force 1, you get the Chaos Breaker, which is a sword of mythic powers from the future. Not really, but the story is about that complicated. Or from the past. It's weird. It's used to defeat the Prime Evil in Shining Force 1, and then it's supposed to be sealed away. The same sword appears in Shining Force 2, named the Force Sword, which is a, again, super weird mythological weapon that, for some odd reason, was renamed the Force Sword, but it is the Chaos Breaker in essence. And yeah, it's the same sword. And much like the ZSaber, it has a very energy-esque appearance, but it is still never classified as a high-tech futuristic sword. It's a blade of energy that's magic energy, which was kind of neat. It was, looking at it, I never actually forget playing Shining Force 2 for the first time and equipping that and seeing the changes. Oh, it's a lightsaber? That's stupid. That doesn't fit a fantasy setting. Until, years later when I realized a lot of the connections. It's like, wait, that's not actually a lightsaber. It could be a lightsaber, but you could also just make the argument that magic energy. And that's what I tend to lean towards, because I think that's cooler than lightsaber for fantasy setting, personally, because it just doesn't seem to fit. So, number 4, the Falchion. I can never pronounce this word. It's Marth's sword from Fire Emblem. Can never pronounce it. because it is a real class of swords, that it is named after a real style of sword. However, Marth's sword looks nothing like the actual style of sword that it is named after. I can try to put up comparisons, I guess. But yes, this sword, and specifically Marth's sword, I don't like the remake that they did for Fire Emblem Awakening. It seems too bland. It doesn't seem all that unique, other than it's got a hole in it, which, Marth's sword looks impressive. It looks much like a fantasy sword, very much like the same style of sword that, for the Master Sword, that it started off very, simplistic because of the art style at the time, just kind of limiting what they were going to put art-wise for the game, and then over time it's become more and more ornate, more and more realistic, and actually a practical sword. It's one of the few swords on this list so far that, could actually exist as a sword. And I've seen a couple of, prop replicas that do not live up to the quality of sword that it looks like in the games, especially a lot of the newer games like Smash Brothers, where you have a much more detailed version of the view model. So, I haven't seen a good quality replica of that, and I would love to get my hands on one, because that is just an awesome looking sword. And plus, like I said, it's fairly practical. So, number 3, the Minato from Xenoblade. Now, this is also one that's kind of odd, because not practical at all. It's very oddly shaped as a sword. Really weird, because the more moving and mechanical pieces of a sword, typically the easier it would be to break it. Like, oh, well, there's a hinge here, I hit someone in the face with it, oh, I broke the hinge. But we're going to go with super high-tech magic sword on this one as well, because that never happens. The sword itself also does open up to have, like, a giant laser sword that cuts through robots, much like the ZSaber, but this one seems a little bit better because it also allows the wielder to access ridiculous types of powers. Much like Mega Man and Zero can absorb enemies' powers, this one just starts you off with a power. Like, oh, guess what? You want to be able to do this? Go ahead, have fun. Minato powers, ahoy. Having a sword that grants powers, not a bad thing. Especially if it is very particular about who can wield it. That's one that, I'm kind of particular. I was like, oh, nope, you can't wield this one, it's going to kill you, or hurt you, or something along those lines. Because you are not worthy of the sword's capabilities. And it knows it. It knows. It can see into the deepness of your soul. Anyway, it's got an interesting mix between sci-fi and fantasy. You've got, sci-fi laser sword, but granting supernatural magical powers. Not something you see quite often. An interesting mix of things. Number 2, the Masamune from Chrono Trigger. I do have to specify this because there are so many Masamunes out there, because the name Masamune is legendary among swords, and it's become almost a trope to have a legendary sword named Masamune because of just how important it is to a lot of Japanese culture, because of the swordsmith and the legend behind their swords. So you got the Masamune and Murasame and all of these swords that seem to be very interconnected because of the legends of the swordsmiths themselves. But Frog's Masamune was one that always intrigued me because it was a European-style sword that had this name, which was very odd. Most of the time you see Masamune, it's a katana, or in Sephiroth's case, it's an odachi. You've got a lot of these, like, katana-style curved single-edged swords, and Frog's sitting here wielding like this two-handed broadsword that's holy and spiritual, and it's one of the only things that can damage the Mammon Machine or Magus's barriers, and it has a very different take on things, whereas in a lot of legend, the Masamune could be a dark and evil sword that, consumes people's soul. This is a stark contrast, and it wasn't until, growing up, learning a lot of these legends, it just started off as, oh, the Masamune, holy sword, that seems, and then finding out later, evil sword? No, I know it is a holy sword. But then just in the context of the Chrono Trigger universe, it is a holy sword that, you know, it's ancient in property, and it's you know, swordsmith itself is also someone of great reverence and power and significance to not only the story but history as well, and its connection to everything is more what kept Frog in than anything else, because, you know, Frog has the sword, but the sword is more integral to the story than anyone realized until you get to a certain point. So it was very interesting to see all of that play out, and again, a two-handed broadsword style sword with a decidedly Japanese swordsmith name. So interesting. And the number one sword on my top 10 list is the Ragnarok from Final Fantasy XI. Now this is complete bias. I'm not even going to lie on this one. This one is complete bias. Because I played a Dark Knight, that was the sword I wanted from day one. I will never forget years and years and years ago when Final Fantasy XI launched on PC in North America. There was no information about it. There was a strategy guide printed that was full of terrible information because it had a very limited amount of research that was able to be done to it, because Square Enix at the time, they made this game very difficult. Very difficult. They hid numbers behind invisible walls where you couldn't see things like your accuracy or your actual well, you could see evasion, but they would hide numbers behind walls, so you didn't know a lot of things. And then you're looking at it, it's like certain classes have an inherent strength for certain weapons. They gravitate towards certain weapons. Warriors gravitate towards hand axes and great axes more. They have higher ranks in those weapons than any other weapon that they have access to. Dark Knights, which is the class that I play, have access to a lot of weapons, but we gravitated more towards scythes. Not knowing that, you look at scythes and you look at greatswords, we had access to both. It's like scythes hit for more damage, but they attacked slower. Greatswords hit for less damage, but hit faster, and that was the mechanic of 11. So looking at like the penultimate weapons that you could get, or the ultimate weapons, depending on what time frame you were at, the greatsword seemed to kind of look more and more interesting to me. And then the abilities that the greatswords had on paper looked more and more interesting. But then there were things about those abilities that were never quite explained. Things like FTP modifiers and stat modifications that affected the damage output, or did the weapon skill have a natural ability to crit, or did you have to force a crit to it? Things like that were never mentioned. So back in the day, I really wanted a greatsword. I thought it looked a lot cooler than the scythes. The scythes seemed a little too emo for me. But then as I played it, I realized, well, Dark Knight has an A+ rank in Scythe and only an A rank in Greatsword. That means toward the end, I'm statistically going to be weaker. I'm going to have less accuracy and less attack, because each rank gives you a set number of levels in mastery of that weapon. So I would have more levels of mastery, and each level of mastery gives you a set number of attack and accuracy. So I was going to be hindered by using Greatswords. Well, I stopped playing for a while, and I came back, and the first thing I wanted to do was get a relic weapon. Because when I stopped playing, the relic weapons were rare. They took entire groups of people ridiculous amounts of time to get. And I always saw the Ragnarok, and I wanted it. So the first thing I did when I came back to playing after like a 3-year hiatus was get the Ragnarok. And then at that time there were upgrades to bring it up to speed, to the fact that the level cap had changed from 75 to 99 in the time that I had stopped playing. So you could take this weapon that at one point was the pinnacle of greatswords. It was the best greatsword you could get, and by extension one of the best weapons, period, you could get. They were able to upgrade it so that it was still viable at 99, and that I was really impressed with. Its abilities were amazing. It added critical hit damage. It had a special attack that once you use the special attack, that in turn also increased your critical hit damage. It could also, as any sort of relic weapon, randomly attack for 2.5 times its normal damage, and that would affect the crit damage or standard damage. So you could hit very hard, very often with this weapon. And while it had different abilities than, say, the Relic Scythe, the Apocalypse, the critical hit seemed like something that I would really enjoy, especially at the time. So I was very happy to finally get that sword before I stopped playing again, because the sword itself looks amazing. Its stats are really, really awesome. It's something it's a very unique class of weapon, and it's one that I would love to own in real life. Special abilities or no, having a sword that large, it's almost like a Buster sword. It really is. The two-handed swords in Final Fantasy XI are Buster sword quality in terms of size, but it's a very, very nice looking sword, and there was so much history for that sword for me personally. There was so much longing. I will never forget the first time I saw one in game. I was wandering around through Juneau, the major hub city at the time, and there was, I believe they were a warrior. I forget what class they were, but I remember them walking past, and I saw the sword, because you could see the view model in their back. And so I actually ended up following them, and I examined their equipment so I could see it and look at the stats in person. And I'm like, how long did it take you to get that? And it took me and my link shell about 1.5 years of, farming up. It was a thing. Never forget that. That was one of those moments. It's like, I saw that, it's like, I have to have this. And eventually I did. And I'm really excited that I did. And the more I'm talking about it, the more I really kind of want to just log back into my account and play more, and I know that's not something I need to do. It's a terrible reaction. That game is like crack that beats you, makes you angry, and you can't stop playing it. So those are my top 10 swords. I will probably have like runner-ups in the video description, but I want to hear what your top swords are. What's your favorite sword from any game or anime or movie, whatever. What is your favorite sword, weapon, whatever? I'd love to hear your top 10 swords, top 10 weapons. Like I said, gaming, anime, cartoons, movies. Can't imagine too many swords in music. Literature, I don't know. Whatever. I want to hear your top swords as well. So comment on the video leaving those, and maybe there's a sword that I missed that should be in my my honorable mentions. So who knows? So I'll see you in the comments. I can't wait to hear your comments. So till then, later everyone.